Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome back to Access to Democracy. As usual, your host, Alan Miller, and I'm really excited to have Mike Ciresi back with us, who is a name recognized not only in the country but worldwide as one of the top attorneys who have ever really practiced before the bar. And I figured I would introduce you, and welcome back, by the way, but by talking about some of your awards and some of the articles you've written and have been written about you. But then I realized we would go through the whole half hour and I wouldn't get to talk with you.
Well, thank you for that, Ellen, and thank you for having me back on the show. Keep in mind that everything that I've been involved in, there's been a lot of people involved in it, and we've always approached every case with a team approach, and there's no woman or man for all seasons. So I've been very, very blessed and fortunate to have some extraordinarily talented people practicing with me over the years.
Well, you were with Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Ciresi for 43, 44 years. You rose to prominence, and you were the chief executive of that firm, among other things. You had some incredible victories and some really, really battles that benefited mankind, such as winning the tobacco verdict for the state of Minnesota. And then we read about 6 months ago that you're leaving this 145 or 150 member firm to start out a small boutique firm on your own. Give us a little history.
Well, and I didn't do it alone. I mean, I left with 5 other people who are extraordinary lawyers, Jan Conlin, Katie Crosby Lehman, Melissa Goodman, Heather McElroy, and Matt Corte. And all of those individuals, and Jan the longest, we've worked on all of the major cases that since the 1980s that I've worked on while I was at Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Ciresi. I mean, I love that firm. It's a great firm. It remains a great firm. But in a larger organization, Alan, you need to have certain processes and procedures in place simply because you have so many people. And you also...
And you have offices all over the country as well.
Right. There are offices in a number of states. And as a result, you have people who are doing different things, and you have conflicts that arise. And there's some natural restrictions on what you can and cannot do. And that's well and good. That's the way it should be in an organization of that size. I felt that I had given the firm 43 years. I had been a major part in building that firm to what it is today. It's on very sound footing. It was a good time for me to do something else if I wanted to do something else, and I did. The common thread through all the major cases that I've had during the course of my career has been that there has to be some aspect of the common good involved, whether take even the Honeywell representation against Minolta and the entire camera industry. This was in the early 90s, and at that time we were getting sort of kicked in the international economic arena because a lot of our intellectual property was being stolen and used. And that was a real cause for me and for us who handled that case. Jan was heavily involved in that case. And so that was a common thread there. In the product liability litigation, whether it was Copper 7 or Dalcon Shield, there was the injustice that was done to women as a result of these defective devices. In the Bhopal case, it was what happened in Bhopal, India, as a result of Union Carbide's pesticide and insecticide plant over there. The cigarette case, etc. So there's always been a common thread that our court system is intended to work for everybody, no matter whether they're powerful or whether they're an individual. And as you know, I've represented many individuals over the course of my career.
That's one of the things that I wanted to get to.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that if there was a needy person, and that's one of the foundations of the founding of Robbins Kaplan, is that person wasn't turned away. And with all these tremendous world-shaking victories that you had, you still had that aspect of your practice where you had time to represent the average person,
right,
the person who might not have representation otherwise, and fight for their rights.
Well, that's really how I started back in St. Paul, representing individuals, and I have continued to represent individuals throughout my career, and I always will. And so one of the reasons we started the new firm is that we were sort of freed from conflicts that you might otherwise face in a larger firm. And the team that we have is probably unparalleled in the country, quite frankly, if you look at the breadth and depth of what we've done over the course of 40 years. And there's, decreasing amounts of years depending on who's involved in the case, but even the youngest has 8 years of practice behind him. So, and Jan and Katie Crosby Lehman have been with me for decades. So we have a unique combination of talents that I think is unparalleled in the country in terms of being able to come in and try a case of any kind or nature, because we've tried intellectual property, products liability, corporate matters, exclusive distributorships, you name it, we've tried it. So we have that ability, and we can be much more flexible in a smaller firm. The other aspect of the firm is that we've been very blessed during the course of our lifetime, and one of the things I learned at an early age, going back to the good nuns at St. Andrews in Como Park in St. Paul, is that you have to give back to the common good. And I learned that at St. Thomas Academy and then again at the University of St. Thomas.
Unfortunately, not everybody learned that lesson, but I know, and knowing you for a long time, that is one that never left you.
No, it did. And contrary to a lot of popular opinion, a lot of lawyers feel that way. But it's been central to what I've done and what I think has been important in my life. And we wanted to give even more in that area. So one of the pillars of our firm, our new firm, Ciresi Conlin, is that from a philanthropic standpoint, we're going to give a much more significant portion of our income to philanthropic efforts. As you know, after the tobacco case, I founded the Robbins Kaplan Miller and Ciresi Foundation for Children. That foundation is still with me. I continue to be the president and chair of that. It's independent from the former firm. And all of us, the founding partners of the new firm, Katie Crosby Lehman, Jan Conlin, myself, have individual foundations. So we're going to take and create a foundation here at the new firm and try to bring that family of charitable foundations together to continue, we hope, to do some good things here in Minnesota.
The Robbins Kaplan Foundation is responsible for millions of dollars.
Right. We've given grants since its founding in 1999 of roughly, now it's in excess of $17 million, primarily in education in the Twin City area, because education is the key. And I think, frankly, it's the civil rights issue of our generation, Alan, today. We have a tremendous, as you know, disparity between children of color and white children in this community. In fact, one of the worst in the nation, which is, when you think about it, we've always prided ourselves on education.
It's so antithetical to the reputation of Minnesota.
It is. And we need to address that, and so we've sort of directed our philanthropic efforts toward that issue, and we're going to continue to do that. So that's another nice thing. It's I suppose somebody could say it's a little bit like Robin Hood. I mean, we're working as lawyers over here, and then we're taking a part of whatever we're able to gain from that effort,
Mostly
and put it
going
toward philanthropic.
from the bad guys to give to the good guys.
Well, if
or
you
to the
assume that everybody on the
underprivileged.
other side of us is always a bad guy, but that's not necessarily
No.
true. It's just that our clients prevailed in a given case because they had the better case. That's all. So I don't necessarily look at the other people as bad guys, although there are times where they are bad guys. The cigarette industry, obviously, and there's others down through the history that
And the
have been.
cigarette industry resulted in a settlement that has meant millions of dollars for Minnesota.
Oh, hundreds of millions.
And,
And it will continue. It goes on each and every year.
Is that money being distributed the way it was originally intended to be
Not at
distributed?
all.
Because I don't think it is.
Not at all. When we first, the case settled on the eve of our closing argument, and when we settled it, we set up a portion of it that was in a foundation, basically, for the children of Minnesota. And it went into every county every year, the income off it.
Right.
And it was over $1 billion. Now, when we had our deficits back when Governor Plenty was governor, he was the first one that went in and said, well, we're going to take that money and use it to eliminate, it was a $4 billion deficit at that time. 25% of it was eliminated by taking that money and directing it toward the deficit.
Which was
Now-
designated for a much more important purpose.
Yes, it was intended to be dedicated for children. Now, he didn't act alone. I mean, he had the legislature, which was both Republicans and Democrats, who went along with it. Then, Governor Dayton and the legislature again took part of the tobacco money and through the bonds, and they used that money for a deficit. So it's been consistent, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, that money has not been used for the purpose intended. I've often said that, there's upwards of somewhere between 165 million to 200 million that comes in each and every year as a result of the case. And it'll vary because as the smoking levels go down, the monies coming into the state will go down. But it's been between, I think, 165 million up to 190 some
Which
million.
is incredible, if you think about it. It reminds me very much of what we've done with Native Americans. I mean, we took their country, we've relegated them to reservations, except for the few fortunate enough to have casinos. We have all these treaties about monies and other benefits that were going to inure to them that we've ignored. And this reminds me of that. Here's money that was designated for children at a time when we're losing the education gap to other countries around the world. And this certainly would have been important, and it goes into the general fund.
Right.
Wrong.
And it is, because when you look at it structurally, doesn't come from the normal tax revenues. So it would be, I think, well advised to take that money that comes in every year and dedicate it toward children. Now, Governor Dayton wants to have universal pre-K at the 4-year-old level. And it's going to cost, he wants to dedicate, what, 360 million dollars toward that. First of all, we have a system today where money is going through scholarships to people and children at the lowest economic level. And I think that's where we ought to dedicate our resources right now. And I think the Senate and the House agrees with that. Governor Dayton, on the other hand, and this is a good policy argument. I mean, he's saying, well, we should put the money at the 4-year-old level and put it for everybody. But what that does is it benefits the very wealthy families and those who can afford to send their kids to child care and pre-K education. And it ignores where the disparities are today. What we do know is that if we send the money toward children who are of the lower economic levels, that we'll have a 16-to-1 dollar return. Now, Art Rolnick from the Federal Reserve, formerly with the Federal Reserve, did these studies, longitudinal studies, And we find that that is the case. That's the cost benefit of it. We get nowhere near that benefit if we dedicated it to 4-year-olds. So I think we could take this money that comes in every year, it's upwards of $160 million, and use that for pre-K education and target it initially toward the kids at the lowest economic level so that we start eliminating and eradicate this disparity. That will pay tremendous returns to this state into the future. And what people have to understand is that it's the children of color who are going to be the ones who are supporting all of us as we grow into old age. Because the demographics are such.
We see what's going on around the country right now. It's if there's one thing that social media has done, perhaps it's to focus more direction on the disparity that you're talking about, that we now have photographs of things that we know have been going on for years, and the wide range of abuse that people of color have taken in terms of jobs, in terms of their ability to live. And we still have people trying to cut social programs of people who really have to scratch to exist. We have arguments over a minimum wage, which at its elevated point is not enough for a family to sustain on one family job. So if we can take these kids and do something for them.
I think the education part of it is where we really ought to dedicate ourselves. I've often said that we're not guaranteed an equal result in this country, and nobody should expect an equal result. What we're guaranteed, and what we should be guaranteed, is an equal opportunity. And the basis of an equal opportunity, fundamentally, at its very base, is a quality education. If we educate our children, then water is going to seek its own level. There's going to be some people that will fail, but by and large, if you provide a good education, people are going to raise themselves up economically. We have, and this is for a whole nother show, but there's a poverty industry in this country where a lot of politicians want to keep people in poverty because it serves their interest, quite frankly. And we see programs that are intended not to help people, but to just give something to them, rather than enabling them to take their God-given talents and develop them to their fullest extent. So but education, to get back to the point I really would like to make, is that the tobacco money, if somebody really had guts in the legislature, or if there was a governor who really wanted to take this, educational problem, really take it on, they'd say, all right, this tobacco money is outside of the normal structure because it's not taxed, it's not that type of structural revenue source. It is an independent source. It goes on forever so long as those tobacco companies are still in existence. Let us at the outset take that money and dedicate it to children at the lowest economic levels to make sure they have pre-K education, because then they will go to school prepared to learn, and that is a critical element.
Sometimes a part of that pre-K education is just making sure that they have a decent breakfast. And the fact of the matter is, if a child comes in who is hungry, we have to feed not only their mind, but we have to feed their body. We have to make sure that they have equal footing there. And in many cases, we're failing in that regard.
Well, yes, we are. We have a lot of children who go to school hungry, but thank God they are being fed in schools.
Fortunately.
They're getting dental help in schools. They're getting all kinds of things.
Here.
We're asking, yes, here.
Right.
We're asking our teachers to do a lot of things that they shouldn't have to be doing, but they have to do it in order for these kids to be in a mindset to get educated. So there's a lot of things from the educational standpoint that we need to do, and I'm passionate about it because I think it's the key to giving people an opportunity. I don't believe in handouts. I mean, my father had a 7th grade education.
Yeah,
He believed
let's talk
tremendously in
about
education.
where you come from and your family background.
Well, my dad was born here, but he then went back to Sicily. They were going to get his grandfather, and World War I was going on, so they couldn't get back, and he came back here when he was a little bit older. He should have been in about 7th grade. They put him in 3rd grade because he couldn't speak English, and he stayed in till he was in about 6th or 7th grade, and then he left. And he went out and helped provide support for his family, like his siblings did. And he worked his way up, and he had a small liquor store, and he worked 8 to 8, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 on Saturdays. He made sure his children went to good schools. My mother died of breast cancer when I was 12 years old, back in the 50s, and that remains today a brutal disease, but it was even more so then because of the lack of real effective treatment at all. So, I learned at a very early age, because my father made me work with him in the store, that you have to work, and nobody owes you anything. You have to take the opportunities that are given to you and maximize them. And that's the point, is that I was so blessed that I had those opportunities. And what we're seeing today is a lot of children that do not have those opportunities. And that is what we owe to our children. And I say our children. All of these children are collectively our children. And we need to educate them so that this country, this state, this country, can continue to provide economic opportunity for everyone.
And if we fail in that regard, we're not only failing ourselves, we're not only failing them, but we're failing the next couple of generations down the road. And that is where we have been falling down. That is where we are not. I call this the greediest generation. Tom Brokaw spoke of the greatest generation, but it seems that there are too many people of substance who are interested in perpetuating themselves and their own ideas rather than the common good. And I have no problem with, I'm somebody who had to work his way through law school. My father had a store, and I was expected to work from the time I was about 10 or 12. Christmas time, I was 12 years old. Santa Claus went out to lunch. I had to get on the Santa Claus outfit and sit there with kids who were almost as old as me and try to be Santa Claus. This is
Didn't work very well.
One of the memories of my childhood that is almost ludicrous to think about today. But it was expected of me, and I had to do it.
Yeah, I think today that, I understand your point that there's a lot of greed, but when you really look at it, you really look at people who have had phenomenal success. And I'm not going to name any names here, but I could go on and name them continuously because I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of them, and I know some of them. I'm not as cynical about or skeptical about the willingness of people who have worked their way up and really made something of themselves. They give back tremendously. I see them do it all the time. I sit on a lot of boards, and I know what they do.
That's why I'm a curmudgeon and you're not.
Well, maybe. But I understand that there is sort of a narcissistic approach to life today in America, but I don't think it's necessarily restricted to those of means. I think that if there is such a streak in America, it crosses a lot of economic lines. And we do need to renew ourselves in a way toward a commitment to the common good. And I mean we collectively, not just those who are the 1%ers, as they say. This goes throughout society. And we have too many politicians who try to divide people. You got the 1%ers, you got the 99%, you got this, that, and the other thing. Everybody is in silos. That's what's wrong with our political parties.
And too many politicians who are seeking to perpetuate themselves as opposed to really thinking about the people that they represent and what's best for the people they represent.
Ask yourself, which politicians stand up and say, let the chips fall where they may, whether I'm reelected or not, this is what the right thing is to do. What they'll tell you is that, well, Mike, I won't be able to be there to do this if I'm not reelected. Well, this isn't a lifetime job, my friend. You're supposed to be representing the people. You're supposed to do what's right for the people. And if you don't get reelected, too bad. Somebody else gets elected, I guess.
And maybe they'll do the job that you
Maybe
were
they
too
will,
busy.
maybe they won't. But what you're in there for is to serve the population collectively, not any special interest. And I think we've gotten away from that. We have too many professional politicians.
I would have to agree with you there, and they're on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing that, see, that's another thing of the silos that we have. I mean, you know, look, I'm a Democrat, so I hang around with a lot of Democrats, but I hang around with a lot of Republicans. But when you're with the Democrats, they say, well, you know, those Republicans, they're all this, that, and the other thing. And then if you're with the Republicans, they say, well, those Democrats are all this, that, and the other thing. And they just generalize. And frankly, neither one is accurate. You know, we have so compartmentalized ourselves, so live in silos, that we have forgotten the commonality. I think a lot of it is with the media and everything that we have today, that it's so prolific compared to what it used to be when you and I were a lot younger. We had, you know, 3 or 4 networks.
You're still a lot younger, but
Yeah, well, not much. 3 or 4 networks, and we got our news sort of uniformly. Today we don't, and people tend to go, if they're very liberal, they only look at liberal things. If they're very conservative, they only look at very conservative things. And if they identify themselves as Democrats, they look at certain things. If they identify themselves as Republicans or independents, they look at certain things. And there's no commonality, I think, that we used to have, and we need to get back to that a little bit more.
and I think that we need desperately to get back to that. And I don't know what the answer is.
I don't
to
either,
me,
Alan.
one of the answers is getting lobbyists out of politics. The British system
I have a
seems
solution
to.
for it.
Pardon?
I have a solution.
Okay.
In Congress, what we should do in Congress, in the House of Representatives, the districts should be evenly cut. In other words, there's no Democratic district and no Republican district. You make the voting split about equal in each one. The person who runs in that district has to take everybody's viewpoints and interest into account.
That would be
and has to
refreshing.
accommodate and has to compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word in politics.
Compromise is what we used to do.
Right.
Sit down.
If you did that, though, you'd have a House of Representatives, for example, that was much more collegial and much more able to look at the issues on a broad basis. There's only 10 or 12% of the seats that are ever competitive.
We have to continue this another time, and I hope you come back
Love to.
and do it. We've been talking with Mike Ciresi. We went far beyond the fact that he is a great attorney. He's a great humanitarian and a great individual, and a pleasure to have you back. It's been too long. Come back again soon so we can continue this.
I will. Ellen, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.